Okay. Good morning and welcome to Weekend Walkabout in our gardens and years virtually.
We're from gardenatz.org. I'm Janet McConovich.
I'm Stephen Nicola.
And we're talking about winter interest in the landscape today, about how the space gets larger through the winter. The colors turn to a different part of the spectrum. They mute. Shapes are more important than anything else, but everything we love is still there. We should be enjoying it, so we want to keep the color and interest going in the winter and help you do that. That's me. Once in a while, I do have the camera out in the garden, but I most of the time have the dirty knees and the suspenders on. And that's Stephen.
It's me. I tend to do things with kids.
Well, he also plays dress up a lot this time of year, including dressing up there, as you see, where he has got our daughter Sonja and her husband Cam sitting on his lap. Well, I guess Cam's not sitting on your lap. You probably couldn't get him to do that. No. Sonja is here with us as both a help on the moderation, on keeping track of the questions and making sure that everything runs smoothly, because she is a professor at the University of Toronto and she's been doing this full time and a half since the beginning of the year, both for her own classes and also as the coordinator for her department. So she knows about this stuff, and that was helpful. She's also an excellent gardener in her own right. Always has been, ever since she told me to leave her weed garden alone back when she was about 4. So you'll find that she's quite often able to answer questions as she goes along, but she does save them for us too as we get to it.
That period was short compared to this one.
So Stephen and Sonja and I, Janet, are going to be talking to you. We've been writing for a long time and researching and helping answer questions about gardens since the late 1980s. 13 years in the Detroit News, a couple of books that we've written, 10 years in the Michigan Gardener. But now we write primarily on Garden A to Z, our website, because we were looking for a place where we could put all that we'd written and not have to keep writing the same thing twice.
Yeah, because somebody would ask for the same article.
Right. And we said, there's got to be a way that we can do this, because we don't want to write the same thing twice. We want to keep learning something new, which is what I think most of us want to do. At least me anyway. And once in a while I run into something like I did in the newsletter that we just put out, where I had a toxic article. I spent a month trying to get that boxwood article to cooperate with me. And I finally got it done and told Steve, don't let me look at it ever again.
She could fix a boxwood faster than she could write it.
Right about fixing the boxwood. So if you have questions, go ahead and send us an email, but you can check out what's on Garden A to Z, where we have thousands of articles up there already. And we want to start out with a flash chat, some ideas of what you're thinking about, because what we're working from here is a workshop, is a long format that we're cramming in, and we want to know where we want to hit it. So our first flash chat question that we're asking you is, as a gardener, what I most value, what I most like about winter is, sorry, I can't see the whole question, Steve, because their screen is smaller, but that's okay. You can see the question in front of you. If you can answer that question, if you have any input to it, we'd like to see that. So at 3, 2, 1, start typing. And send. Seeing the architecture of trees. I love snow too. And snow on the tree branches is definitely one of the most beautiful things. Berries are good.
It's hard for me to manipulate that down. No weeding.
It is nice, isn't it, that you can actually take a break.
Resting.
Yeah. What do people do down south where they
don't garden in the summer?
They don't garden in the summer when it's really hot. We found that out. It is a very simple garden in the winter. Good. Animal footprints in the snow. Yeah, boy, can you tell where they go or not? Of the beauty of the basic plantings. That's right on regenerating snow on evergreens. We do have
go back to the screen if we're going to move it.
We do have another question for you. If you've finished thinking about that one, you can move on to our second question, which is, my winter landscape is heavy on what and lacking what? Have you thought about this one? If you have, give us a heavy on, lacking in. Seeing the voles, yes, seeing them tunnel around. Remember that one that I chased all around the yard, or followed his path all around the yard?
Heavy on evergreens. Heavy on space.
Empty space where the perennials have gone down.
Evergreen's color. Evergreen's lacking.
And
right.
height. Yeah,
Height.
yep, height does go away. Diversity. Heavy on nothing, lacking anything. Good, Donna. On spruce, lacking diversity. Yeah, a lot of spruces in some people's yards. Heavy on hostas and lacking structure. Okay, that is very helpful. As I said a minute ago, and we'll finish looking at some of these as we get into chat and tell us what more to do from here on out. We're working in winter interest in the landscape and looking at chapter 1. We're going to do 3 chapters, and part of it will feel fast to you, at least I hope it will. We're going to look, then critique, then change. And we have a lot of things written down for you under look, including on the outline. Remember, you can download that outline off of the website called Winter Interest in the Landscape. And many of the plants that we're going to tell you about are not only written on the screen, so you can review this, but they're written on your handout. What we want to do is start with the fact that there's lots of plants that can stand out in the wintertime.
A lot.
A lot. And some of our favorites are yews grown in their natural shape.
Just let them be.
Yeah. Here's a hybrid yew. This is the kind of yew that most of us grow around our houses in the United States. It's a cross between the Japanese yew and the English yew, and they call it cross media, or the Anglo-Jap yew. And just grown by itself, it's a little bit here and there and all around, kind of roughly rounded and big. One of the varieties that a lot of us, the lucky ones of us, grow in our house is called ward-eye, and it spreads sideways. This may very well be one ward-eye yew. It'll get to be 6-7 feet tall and can just keep growing sideways. I've seen them 15 feet across.
They're beautiful.
They're beautiful. And
dark green all the time.
This is this is a Japanese yew. Many people grow them as in their pyramidal form and keep them clipped into little 3-foot-high pyramids. This is a Japanese yew on its way to being the tree that it is. It's a very big tree when it gets going, and that's just one Japanese yew. Beautiful plants.
This is Hicksai yew. We manipulated it, but it has that structure, that upright structure.
Yes, it wants to grow more upright than out, where ward-eye grows.
And they can get to 15 feet or more.
Yeah, and we've espaliered that one. But there's a Hicksai yew growing up in front of a a Densi or a brown-eyed yew behind it, growing out to the side.
It gets pruned regularly.
It's bare on the bottom because of deer.
You could tell how
not
big
because
the
it wants
deer
to
are.
grow that way. Yeah. Yeah, actually, if you say that's a deer height, so you can say that that's probably about 15 feet tall.
Yeah.
So yews are one of our favorites to use, but we like to use them grown naturally rather than clipped. You don't clip them and let them get away from you just once, and then the winter makes you feel bad the whole winter. Yeah. Blue spruces are nice things to have in the landscape. Big blue spruces.
Healthy
like you see
ones.
Here, the wider one is the blue spruce. But there are a number of dwarf varieties. This one is probably Coster. We're not sure anymore. It comes from our friend Dennis Crow's garden.
Yeah.
And heavens,
Dennis's garden
has
changes
some
frequently.
unusual things. But it's blue and it's slower growing. It doesn't mean it's going to stay little forever, but it's slower growing than the big one. This one is called Pungens glauca Pendula. It really kind of just throws itself around on the ground. In fact, I remember wrestling it out of the ground at the clients, and I kind of rolled around with it.
I wouldn't call it it's weeper, but.
Yeah. There is a wide spreading form of blue spruce right here, but now we're into a different kind of spruce, the Norway spruce. This is a very popular dwarf Norway spruce called the bird's nest spruce. There's also repens and a couple that look like it, but it is basically a Norway spruce, which can be 70 feet tall, kept smaller.
120.
And, right. Usually they stay under
70.
5 feet,
Yeah.
but then they keep just growing sideways.
Yeah.
Yep. Then there are spruces from the white spruce. Picea glauca is the white spruce, and the dwarf Alberta spruce, which is so famous as little chubby Christmas tree type, like gnomes outside,
tight.
Right, is called Conica or dwarf Alberta spruce.
And
then
there's junipers, and lots of junipers.
And in this case, the rug junipers. You're looking at a rug juniper of the common juniper variety. There's a rug juniper of the rug horizontalis. There's a rug juniper back here that's a shore juniper. And you can see all these different colors. There's nothing wrong with these plants. They actually
That's-
have different colors.
That's
Some
their
are,
winter color.
some are greener, some are blue and go to gray. This is called blue rug, and it's the color that it is right now. And it was called blue rug, selected because it kept its blue a bit better than some of the others do. We're very fond of the rug junipers. And we do like the spreading junipers, as long as you've got
Yes.
the room. Spreading junipers are trees grown sideways.
They get big, even the quote unquote dwarf ones.
Yeah, probably the most common ones are the Chinese junipers, Juniperus chinensis, that spread sideways. And they can go 25, 30 feet wide. They might be only 7, 8, 9 feet tall, and some are shorter than that, but they go very wide. And they are in various colors of kind of golds and greens and grays. And some of them have picky needles. So there's no better way to say it than that. And some are softer needles because they were selected. If they have picky needles, they have the juvenile foliage. The adult foliage is softer. And sometimes the variety just has all soft needles. So if you don't like picky things, I don't, you may be picking the softer ones like blue rug.
Juniper makes me rash and itch a lot, so I definitely don't like, but I love the plant.
Sonja and Steve both have that sensitive skin. The Virginia junipers are the upright junipers. There are native junipers. They're in the blues and the grays and greens. You see them growing all over alongside the freeway, especially as you head down Ohio and into Kentucky. And we don't have any great pictures right now to show you the smaller, bluer ones, but they have names like Skyrocket and Manhattan and Boulevard, and they grow upright. And then there's the arborvitaes, which most everybody knows arborvitaes. Some people call them cedars, and they can quite properly be called eastern white cedar. The standard when we were growing up was an arborvitae that turned kind of brown in the wintertime.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it, not dying. They just turned that color because they were protecting their needles by pulling out some of the chlorophyll. Some of the varieties you can buy now, like this one, are whiskey colored, and that's a deliberate thing, and they get more whiskey colored in the wintertime.
Yep.
Some, though, have been selected to stay green. This one is probably Techne, based on its size and the shape of its branching. Is one called Techne. It's kind of ferny looking, and it will stay this green in the wintertime. So will one called Niagara. So you're actually selecting for the size you want, the color you want, the softness of the needles. All of these things are things you can choose for, unless you moved into some place that has a bunch of things already planted.
And arbs are deer food too.
Yeah.
They'll prune them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
yeah.
too.
They generally don't eat spruces and junipers, or not much, but they will definitely eat arborvitae.
Yeah.
Pines are another one. Eastern white pine gives us a lot of varieties of pine. In its full-size state, they tend to be those statuesque, picturesque, wind-blown critters.
They're not tight little Christmas trees.
No. And in some parts of the country, Massachusetts, New York, they're viewed as weeds because they come up everywhere all the time, whether you want them or not. Certainly in our yard, there's pines coming up all over the place. But what aren't weeds are the dwarf forms. This cute little bun is called the dwarf white pine, Pinus strobus nana. Nana means little. It will get to be bigger. Let's see how big was Mom's in 10 years. It was probably
5 by 5 easily.
Yeah, 5 by 5. Well, I was keeping it cut down.
That's what I mean.
Window, so yeah, if I hadn't kept it cut lower, it'd probably be 5 by 5, but it was about 3 by 5. And they have that rough. This one's got ice on it, of course, so that means the branches splay a little bit. But it has kind of stays in a mound, but it gets kind of be a rougher open mound as it gets older. And many people know the weeping white pines. Pinus strobus, Pendula, which might weep 6 feet tall. It might weep 3 feet tall. It depends on how the grower supported it till the trunk got thick.
It was grown.
There are other pines. The weeping red pine happens to be one of our favorites because our son just loved it. It looked like a jellyfish, he said, at the botanical garden. Weeping red pine is it's a different species. It's an Asian species. And we like how they look.
It like the way it flows and develops a skirt. It'll actually creep along the ground a little bit if you allow it, or down rocks real nice.
Yeah, most of these pendulous trees dwarf forms are really just trees growing sideways because they can go a long way. The one at Hidden Lake of the Pinus strobus pendula, this weeping red pine, had a skirt that
Not Pinus
probably,
strobus and Pinus.
sorry, Pinus densiflora pendula. The one at Hidden Lake Gardens in Tipton, Michigan State's outlying botanical garden, the skirt probably went 12 feet in all directions by the time when we last saw it. There are also Japanese white pines that tend to be more blue-green and have that open look. They have spaces between the needles, and there are people who say they look like poodles that have been trimmed. And this one, I think, is a limber pine.
I think it's a limber too.
Yeah. So there are a lot of different plants we can grow, including mugo pine. Sonja was talking about the fact that her mugo pines at her house have finally gotten big enough to put lights on. We selected for her not Pinus mugo here, which is the dwarf mugo pine. We selected for her Pinus mugo pumulo, which is smaller.
Supposedly even smaller. It looks like it will stay smaller.
Because Pinus mugo gets big. See this guy here? He's reaching up to the 8-9 foot level. The full-sized mugo pine will get to be 15 feet tall. The dwarf one will get to be about 9-10 feet tall. And that Steve and I are standing in front of our mugo pine here.
That's easily 12, 15 feet tall.
Yeah. So they can get big. You need to know some things about that. They're also moving down the list of evergreens, false cypress, hemlocks, grape holly, and boxwood, with a number of more colors. Now, the false cypress, called the Japanese garden cypress, is a big tree. Big. 100 feet in its native area, with a trunk big enough around that it could be cut down and become the center of a big temple, holding up a big temple. So they're called Japanese temple cypress. The dwarf ones are what most people want to grow. This one is Obtusa nana.
Such a cute little plant with all the little texture in it.
We liken them to a coral reef, all these little wavy reef-like looks on them, and very beautiful green that goes to a dark green, almost a black green in the wintertime. There's our little tiny one we left at our old house. I suppose probably without a gardener in charge of it, it didn't make it because they're very slow to grow. But there are many hundreds of types of Japanese false cypress. This one has gold tips on it and is called gold fan, I believe, but it might be any of 100 others. There are golder, bluer, more open, bigger, slower. It's a wonderful group of plants. Closely related are the saguaro false cypress. Some people call them the mop false cypresses. They have thread leaf. And this is gold mop, which is smaller than the full-size one. Steve, on our website, you can look at pictures of Steve cutting a false cypress that was, let me see, you were at the top of a 12-foot ladder. So it was a good 20 feet tall, and when Steve cut it down to 15 feet, these won't get that big, but they do grow more quickly than people think they will. And they don't keep their gold bright in the wintertime, but it does stand out as gold in the winter. You do notice it. You do notice it different than the greens and the blues. And one of our favorites, not a good smelling one, but a good false cypress, is Alaska false cypress. You're looking at one of the bottom branches coming out and through the snow on the bottom because they grow this way. They're kind of the ghosts of the false cypress world.
They're pretty cool. They make we kept topping one in our backyard to make a Christmas tree before we started doing branches.
Yeah. Imagine this top part right here. I would cut it off and let a new piece grow up, and I would bring in a 6-foot Christmas tree like that.
But they were beautiful.
And its name is so cool, Chamaecyparis nootkatensis, from the Nootka Valley that it grows in. Then there are the hemlocks. This is a Sargent hemlock. It's a Canadian hemlock variety that grows more sideways than up and turns quite a dark color in the wintertime. We like hemlocks a lot. They're getting very hard to find because there is a hemlock, adelgid, an severe insect problem that's caused states to quarantine from each other, not shipping hemlocks.
We're not getting some hemlocks from growers and vice versa.
But as with the false cypresses, there are hundreds of hemlocks, sideways growing like Jetalo, white tips like Gench white, narrow ones, little bun-shaped ones.
Such cool Cool, fine little needles.
Yeah. Then there's Oregon gray polly. This is the dwarf Oregon gray polly, this purplish leaf in the foreground here. It is a suckering shrub. It's related to barberry. And so Steve also gets irritated when it scratches his skin as if with
I
juniper.
like it, but it's a scratcher.
What we like about it is that in the winter, when the leaves get cold, they turn purple. So you have this purple holly-looking plant. It will burn out if it's in the
wrong conditions.
if it's out in the wind and too much sun. But if it doesn't burn out, sorry, I went the wrong way. I didn't mean to go that way. If it doesn't burn out, the new growth will come out red in the spring on top of the old foliage that's turned back to green. It's quite a pretty plant. And then it'll bloom yellow.
And it's got that glossy look to its leaves.
Yeah. Then there are the boxwoods.
And again,
many types of boxwoods.
A lot of these pictures we've shown you different colors in the winter. That's going to botanical gardens and seeing collections.
Sure.
That helps.
Yeah, this is the boxwood collection at Hidden Lake Gardens that we're looking at right here. And there's nothing wrong with these boxwoods. There's nothing wrong with this small one that's brown on the tips. That's the color that they turn in the winter. And one of the reasons that Stephen and I go to botanical gardens in the winter is to go see how these plants behave in the wintertime and choose which ones we want to grow.
Because we can't grow them all.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So nothing wrong. That's not a dead boxwood. That's the color that its leaves turn in the wintertime. Many of the varieties that were selected because they stay more green than others have names like Green Mountain, Green Gem, Winter
Green
Gem.
Velvet.
Right. This is Green Mountain. They could be much, much bigger than this, easily 10 feet. I keep them cut this way every 2 years to keep them middle and pyramidal. And then there are the ones that are harder for some of us to grow. Okay, for people in the getting closer to the ocean and in a more moist
Down
winter
in Tennessee
climate. Tennessee, up in the mountains. Even Massachusetts, where my sister lives, they grow very wonderfully. But in the Midwest, it's too dry and windy, and these rhododendrons tend to look like that. And I'm ashamed to even show that, but that is very typical. Very cold, very dry. The leaves curl up, quite often get damaged, and don't look so good when they unroll the next year. Yeah. But if you've got a protected place and you don't mind making sure that they stay watered, they can be a good addition to the winter landscape. I prefer to use leatherleaf viburnum if you want to have something that looks kind of shaggy, like a rhododendron in the wintertime. This is leatherleaf viburnum. They grow in the sun and in the shade. They grow very well in the shade, and they grow quickly. They keep these leaves through the winter until the next year's leaves push those leaves off.
They'll lose some. There's more semi-evergreen than completely evergreen.
Yeah, it depends on the winter, on how much evergreen they stay. So what you end up with, if you get a variety of these things, is you've got starting with yews on the top left and then going down and across the rows here, yews, spruces, arborvitaes, junipers. Look at all the colors that you've got. These are all winter pictures that you're looking at here. These are the colors and the range of colors. If you consider that brownish orange, you've got all the colors from the blues all the way into the reds. And if you, like we, want to find out more about them, then winter is the very best time to go to some place that has a dwarf conifer collection. Hidden Lake Gardens in Tipton, Michigan has one.
Dawes Gardens
Arboretum.
In Ohio.
The Arnold Arboretum.
National Arboretum, Chicago Botanic Gardens, Minnesota Landscape Arboretum.
Cornell Plantations. You can sit on a bench, just like you're looking at here. You can sit on a bench and admire the conifers. And after you've decided which one it is that you need for its color or its shape in your garden this winter, you can trot over to it and read the tag to find out exactly what kind it is. You don't have to guess like you're looking at when you drive down the street and wonder what somebody's planted in their yard.
And often they'll have a code on there that will tell you when it was, if you knew the code, when it was planted. That gives you a hint of how big it can get. That's
right, how fast it's going to grow. It's called the accession number, and you can find that out at the office at any botanical garden. Say, how do I read your tags? How do I know how long something has been planted? And then you can combine things in the yard. This is one of our clients' yards, although I'm not sure that Shirley and Steve are still in this house, and some of the things have changed, but you've got false cypress, euonymus. There's a climbing hydrangea over here. Yep. There's junipers over there. Now, if you add to that the evergreen, the perennials that stay evergreen, so they basically color the ground a different color around your bigger evergreens, your tree evergreens, you can get a lot of color combinations. This is Bergenia, also called pig squeak, because if you rub the leaves, they do squeak, or heartleaf Bergenia. This is the new foliage coming out in the spring, where the old foliage has laid down. And depending on how cold it is and how exposed it is, it'll go to reds and to purples in the wintertime. And believe it or not, that can look quite attractive on the ground, especially when it's around something that might be blue or a deeper green color.
And if it's a shallow snow, you get that red sticking up a little bit.
Sure, you get the texture too.
Makes look, yeah.
Then there are the Lenten roses, which we used to think of as like peonies, all these special plants. And then we found out that, boy, they're great ground covers. They do need protection. If you grow them in the open, you're going to end up with leaves dying back, like you see in this picture here, which is not attractive and makes it harder to cut the old leaves away. They are evergreen, but they're going to lose this year's leaves as next year's leaves begin to grow. And that can make it look bad when the flowers come out. So most of us cut the leaves off sometime in the spring, or we cut them off in the fall and put a branch on top of them. In a protected space in the wintertime at our client's Garden Sue's, where there's a tree in a house helping cut the wind and shade the area, this is what they look like in the winter versus what you see here. So you want to put them in protected places. And this I put in instead of Christmas fern because it is it's ferny looking. It's not stiff like a Christmas fern. But a few weeks ago, I told you I couldn't find a good picture of this one. This is meadowsweet that we planted as just a little tiny piece when we built this rock wall, and it has been working its way out.
It was about that piece right there.
That's all it was. It will stay green right into January, and then it might or might not
go to
die
yellow
back. Yeah.
brown.
This is myrtle euphorbia, or something spurge.
Christian's
Donkey tail spurge.
Well.
Yeah, and it is as blue as it looks there. It's very pretty to look at.
It's a little bluer than that.
Yeah. There's lavender for the grays, and dianthus for the blue hairy look here, mixed in with the sedum angelina,
which virtually almost stays evergreen.
Yeah, we happen to like these two together. My son is irritated with these two together.
I like them a lot.
Thymes. This is woolly thyme, which has a blue-green and then goes to a gray-green look in the dead of winter. But there are times we have golden thyme growing in our yard, lemon thyme, mother of thyme, thyme that has a red tint to it, and they're just flat on the ground rugs.
You know, when people say winter and you say you live in the north, everybody pictures you have all this beautiful snow all the time. We really, unless we're farther north, we don't get that much snow, and it's so cool to have these little things.
Yeah, it is. It's very cool to see them. Foam flower in the shade. This is our native tiarella that creeps around like strawberries do, and this particular variety, and I can't even remember which one. I planted it many years ago at a client's yard, and I keep taking pieces from it because we like it so much. Has the veins of a different color on it.
Yeah, it probably doesn't even. They probably already changed it too.
And then there are some perennials that are not truly evergreen. They're called semi-evergreen, like this one. The leaves died back when it got cold enough. This is border jewel, Persicaria Pinus, that is a delightful ground cover. Blooms most of the summer, and because it keeps the leaves, even when they turn into this state, it keeps weed seeds from getting to the ground. It's a very good ground cover, and that chocolatey color around the right plant.
It's not such a bad
It can look
bad
pretty
color.
good.
It can look awful too, to be honest, in the right spot, in the wrong spot.
You got to find a place to use it. Now we have our native Pachysandra, the Allegheny spurge, and there's the Allegheny spurge on the top left, and below it is the Asian, more commonly used Pachysandra terminalis. We happen to like the native one better for a lot of reasons. It is a native; it should be used. It's slower.
It needs needs a little more shade, I think. It seems to burn a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think both of them belong in the shade. Yeah. People just put them out in the sun.
Yeah.
And then we didn't give you names of things like vinca and ivy English ivy that we'd rather that you didn't use, because just for your own sake, they are maintenance nightmares if you are trying to grow a garden of mixed plants, because you can't fight with ivy.
They don't
Can't
blend well with other plants.
Yeah.
They don't get along.
Another thing that looks really good is trees and shrubs that have a good clean form. And by clean form, we mean that you can look out there and they don't look like a bad hair day. They look like their branches are growing on purpose into the configuration that they are. And chief among them, with apologies to those who are in states that can't buy these anymore, this is dwarf burning bush. In some places, it's become a terrible nuisance. We could go, and we will go into that on a later date, that there are things that we think should be kept from coming, and there are things that have already in and already have made a mess of things, and we'd rather not focus on those. But they are beautiful plants if you are growing them where you can keep them from setting seed and spreading around. But there are others like that who grow with very orderly direction to their branches. This is the well, I think this one is giant dogwood.
No, that's pagoda dogwood. Okay. It's at Longwood.
I listed it as pagoda dogwood, yep. But
no, we've gone up. I've gone up there and looked at the tag.
Okay. But it has a very precise whorl of branches. It goes up layer by layer by layer, and in the winter, especially, looking at the architecture of trees, as Suzanne, I'm not sure who wrote that. This is a flowering dogwood, which also has that horizontal layering of its branches that can look much better than a twiggy thing out there. Because twiggy things, this one's an amber maple. We're not recommending it to you as good clean form. We're just comparing it. Its branches are going where they're supposed to go. It's filling all the space all around it, but it doesn't look like, it looks like someone stuck their finger in an electric socket.
And it's a hard plant to prune, even to make it look to a shape, whereas a dogwood and others seem to fit shapes that are easier to maintain.
And even the Japanese maples. This one is probably Crimson Queen, the variety Acer palmatum Crimson Queen. And the Crimson Queen is known as the fat lady bending over, because that's what she looks like from the side. She spreads out to the sides. And I have been told by some children that it looks like a tarantula. So, you know, you have good Japanese maples and you have Japanese maples that need help to look better. We are very fond of the spireas, especially those spireas that bloom in the summer that we can cut down and have grow back again. This is bridal veil spirea, which blooms in the spring. This is the old-fashioned Van Hoot spirea.
This is a big shrub.
If I cut it all the way back, I'm not going to get bloom the next year, but I can cut it all the way back. But I don't need to. It makes a neat mound. Birds love it. It's dense.
They use it a lot. Double file viburnum has that another horizontal aspect.
Yeah, they call it the wedding cake shrub in England because it has layers. So these are all examples of things that have good architecture. Some crab apples do have good architecture. Not all crab apples. This one is probably Adams. We never did get a tag on it. It was in the ground already where we started working on the garden. But by its size and the color of its flowers and its fruit, we think it's Adams. And it's one of the better, less crazy ones.
But holding the fruit is one of the things that can be a selling point too.
Comes later.
Yeah. I thought it was now.
No. Sergeant crabapple grows wider than tall.
Oh.
And someone here has been clipping it, and that makes it bushier than it should be, but it is quite a shrubby plant on its own. And it goes the same way for trees. This is a horse chestnut, and there is no making a horse chestnut look anything but hoary. They just do. That's how the habit that their branches have of growing, as compared to, Steve, I listed as a black gum. Is it a black gum?
No, it's
a black oak.
It's a big oak. It might even be the beech.
No, it's not a beech. I'm sure it was an oak or a
then
black
it's
gum.
the oak. It's not a black gum.
Yeah. At any rate, it's either black gum or black oak. Some of them have much better branching, much cleaner branching, stronger branching, horizontally and upward. And those are things to treasure and to protect and to encourage to grow that way by pruning them regularly. Then you add in things that you like to look at the bark. And this comes from two people who visited my brother down in New Orleans one year for Mardi Gras, and we're sitting at dinner across from people we didn't know, and we got to waxing eloquent about how beautiful the crepe myrtle was that we'd seen at the
bark.
At the bark at the zoo, and we were going on and on until the guy across the table from us, I noticed his mouth was hanging open. I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And he said, "No,
y'all must have long winters."
Because we were so into the bark.
Somebody asked our friend, did we have polar bears? And she said yes.
Yeah, before we could even stop her, she said, if he doesn't know, then I'm going to tell him.
But that's yew bark.
That's yew bark, and this is what Japanese yew bark has a tendency to do. And some of the hybrid Japanese and English yews turn this color. It's a gorgeous thing to look at. This is the crepe myrtle that we can't grow crepe myrtle in Michigan except as a dieback shrub.
So we don't get that bark.
We never see the bark. So Steve brings me these pictures all the time when he heads south, and I always say, stop bringing me pictures of something I can't have because they're so beautiful.
We could come close though.
Yeah, we can come close with other things.
Stewardia.
Yeah, the Japanese Stewardia pseudocamellia has a three-colored bark that breaks up.
Paper bark maples. So many tones to them.
Yeah, they're beautiful small trees. Small, not tiny, small. Let's see. I was up in Dennis's. Must be 25 feet tall at Dennis's. It's probably about the biggest one I know. At the Arnold Arb, it was a good going
70.
on. Yeah, it was going on 70 feet tall. But beautiful bark, just gorgeous bark. Even the policeman who patrolled the Arnold Arboretum on horseback
knew
where it was when he found us stumbling around looking for it. Lacebark elm is a fast-growing rough bark tree as it gets older. So this one is now 2 feet in diameter. It's still broken up bark, not quite as lacy as it was to begin with. But that's a 20-year-old tree that you're looking at. It's a fast-growing, beautiful tree. One of the trees that Mike Durr, one of the foremost authorities on trees and shrubs, says really should be used more than it is.
It's also often called a Chinese elm, and it's not. I mean, there's another elm that's a Chinese elm that has a bad reputation.
Yeah, should not be confused.
That's
with
why
the
common
Siberian
names.
elm. Yep.
Sorry.
Then the serviceberries, because their gray bark is so pretty, and the machias. This is an ammermachia with bark like cherry, and really cool because it blooms in late June and July, which is a nice thing to have in a garden. That's the machia. The Coosa dogwood, I think this is Ted and Lee's tree, where when I got there one year, Ted had put wire all the way around the bottom of it, and I asked why was he putting wire around the tree? And he said, something's chewing on the bark.
That's right, yes.
I said, no, it's supposed to do that. As it gets older, the bark breaks up into many colors, like you see here at the base of an older Coosa.
It does look a little bit like damage. That's lace.
It was interesting that I learned that when these trees that peel are actually more pollution tolerant because they are getting rid of the gunk that gets through the lenticels in the bark.
That's lace bark pine and
paper birches.
Paper birch.
Our native paper birches with their beautiful white trunks, white bark, and the European birch. If you see our native birch, the branch ends stand upward.
They're upright.
The European birch is tip over, which is why its species name is Pendula. It's Betula pendula. And then there's river birch, which people plant like this on their lawn, thinking that it's just like the white birch, a little tree. It is not a little tree.
It's bigger than the white birch. 75,
80 feet when it gets going.
And the bark gets to be rather normal looking after.
Sure, it's corky bark as the tree gets older, and only the branches way up there, the younger branches still have that cinnamon peeling look.
Cinnamon peeling. Sorry.
And then there's the twigs on things like red twig dogwood. Pay no attention to those awful smoke trees behind there that have been pollarded and grow back like the whomping tree in Harry Potter and scare kids to death in their silhouettes. The red in the foreground, though, is red twig dogwood. And its cousin, the yellow twig or red osier dogwood, this is the variety called flavoramia, which is yellow twigs. And the another cousin, the blood twig, Cornus sericea. This one is probably midwinter fire. It might be cardinal, but the point is that this is the real color that the young wood on these plants is.
And stress the young wood.
Young wood, yeah.
You notice these shrubs have been there for years, but they clean them up. Oh, sorry.
There you are pointing at the screen.
I'm pointing at the screen. These have been there for a number of years at Missouri Botanic Gardens, but they keep
cutting them back because the young wood is the wood that has the most color for a couple, 3 years. And many of the dogwoods do this. This is the gray stem dogwood, a native suckering shrub for the shade. And in the shade, you can see the gray-red color that it has at the ends of its twigs. Other plants that have nice twigs are Kyria. This is Japanese Kyria with the yellow flowers on it in May and June.
Real light, fine twigs.
And that's the color that the new wood is. The coral bark maple, this is one of the Japanese maples, sangu kaku. I can't see the name on it. It means blood red coral bark, and it's a beautiful thing to look at.
And they're little lure.
The yellowwood, one of our native trees, native to southern slice of Michigan. The yellowwood has beautiful gray bark, beautiful smooth gray bark. The
twisted willows.
This is a twisted willow. It's not Harry Lauder's. This is not Harry Lauder's. No, excuse me. I'm not sure why that got on here because there's Harry Lauder looking like a sheepdog in the summertime in the middle of the yard, right there. They look kind of just like a lump in the summertime, but in the winter they have all the twisty twigs on them. If you have a Harry Lauder and it's not doing well, be advised that that's what happens to Harry Lauders. They are related to the filbert. And our native filbert, our native hazel, carries but does not die from a fungus disease, which does kill the European Harry Lauders. So sooner or later, it's going to die back, and then it's time for you to plant another one in another place.
Or go someplace else, go a different direction.
Golden weeping willow is the one that people like so much, and it just yellows up so wonderfully in the springtime. So then there are plants that keep things through the winter. Some people get upset that oaks keep their younger leaves on the parts of the plant that haven't borne seeds yet, made acorns. Those are called marcescent leaves, and they'll stay until springtime. And marcescent is one of the words that's in our part of Garden A to Z we call scrabbling, where we keep our neat words that people should know. But the other things that plants keep that we do like more are things like, well, it's not truly a berry.
We call it berry, but it's a cone.
Yeah, on the junipers. And you're looking at Chinensis, the Hetzies carry the kind of gray cones in great numbers. The Virginiana carries the bluish cones. And some of them carry many, many cones like Keatlery does. So you can actually read before you get them, and we do, because we're looking for those. We depend on those every year for in wreaths and in arrangements. They're beautiful to have and very long lasting in the winter. Much more reliable than holly, which may or may not have a lot of berries on it for you. Certainly pretty when they do, and difficult in some cases, like the rhododendrons, to keep from drying out in the wintertime. The winterberry, also called Michigan holly by those of us who live in the Great Lakes, but it belongs all over the Northeast and Central United States, Central East United States. Yeah. Winterberry loses its leaves in the wintertime, which means it's not going to get all dried out, and will set a lot of fruit as long as you have a male someplace in your collection. Within bee flying range, you need to have a male somewhere.
They might hide them way back here. That might be the male, because they're straggly and
we have clients who have all female shrubs, no males, and they still get fruit, and it's because somebody somewhere in the neighborhood has that male that blooms at the same time.
The right male.
Other red fruits are things like cranberry bush viburnum, which hangs onto the plant the whole winter. Hollies, generally the cardinals and some other birds will come and get, or the fruit will fall off by Christmas time. Cranberry bush viburnum stays on until spring. And when it turns into raisins, then the birds start eating it.
Yeah, unless they're really hungry earlier.
And there are a lot of trees that people call cherries that are actually just crab apples that have tiny fruit. And some of the tiny crab apples are red. Some of the tiny crab apples are yellow. Some are almost a purple color. And you can choose for that. You can choose for the size of crab apple, the tininess of the fruit, and how long it hangs on.
And persistence of the fruit.
Yeah.
And disease resistance at the same time.
Yeah, so you do that. Mountain ash keeps the dingleberries on it until the birds come and eat them in the late fall.
Firethorn, pyracantha.
Vicious plant, pyracantha, but beautiful fruit when it's healthy. Roses will have hips on them if you have a good blooming rose and can let it grow big.
Bayberry.
I
And
like bayberry a lot.
everything smells on that plant.
I will always, when I pass a bayberry, grab a hold of one of the branches and strip off some of the fruit and put them in my pocket, because it does indeed, it is where the bayberry scent comes from, and it makes everything smell good. The leaves are sometimes evergreen, or some winters do what you see here, where they turn apricot color all over the whole plant.
And don't think it's a small plant.
No, these are not small plants. It's a wonderful native, but it can get big. There's
And
a
it
great one at
runs.
Cedar Point that's pruned as a tree. My kids used to ask me on the way to Cedar Point what my favorite place was, and I would say the bayberry and the weeping pine by the Iron Maiden or Iron Dragon. Or
Yeah,
whatever that one was called.
we tell the rides by the plants.
Yeah. Hydrangeas can be cool for keeping the flowers, the seed stalks. And depending on what kind of pine you have and what kind of spruce you have, the cones can be very attractive, especially hanging on the pendulous ones. And then there's the whole groups of perennials that keep their stalks and seed heads through the winter. And some are better and some are not of the sedums. Sedum autumn joy certainly holds its shape well. And some of the miscanthus and other big grasses stand up well. They can be beaten down by snow and still
pop back up.
back up again. This is our native Veronicastrum or Culver's root. It turns black in the winter. And you might think that that's, why would we want black? It is a great combination with other plants.
It's very different to have a black plant. Yeah. We're so brown in the winter.
Yeah, behind it, in this picture here, behind it are the Siberian iris, which turn coppery in the winter. You can't tell when the snow's on top of them.
Yeah.
But the copper and the black together can be very nice to look at. Or you can just get sculptures and put color out there. You know, get a marching band and have it march through your garden. Definitely pulls a lot of excitement. So questions about kind of plants so that we can get into looking at what you want to put out there, and now we can get into critiquing and changing the garden around. Do we have any questions? I've not been watching the chat.
Do we have to unmute? I can't hear anything. Anybody there?
Let's see. I hear the kids.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry about that. My headset was being funky. We have lots of questions. People seem very intrigued by some of these plants and want to figure out how to get them. So Mark is curious how yews, arborvitaes, etc., how they do in the shade.
Yews do very well in the shade. Arborvitaes do passably in the shade. False cypress do passably in the shade. Many of the viburnums do pretty well in the shade. Hollies do pretty well, and Oregon grape holly does wonderfully in the shade. I do all the time when I'm putting them into people's designs. When I rank them, I will pick yews first, and if I can't grow yews because of deer or whatever other thing in the shade, then I'll move to growing grape holly or the leatherleaf viburnum, and move from there into the regular hollies and false cypresses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so
hemlock's okay in the shade. It's like arborvitae. It's okay in the shade.
So that was actually then Carol's question about the light conditions for the dwarf hinoki cypress. That's the same as for the Japanese cypress, right?
Yes, I've grown. Yes, they're also called hinoki cypress, the Japanese garden cypress. I've grown the hinoki cypresses, the Japanese garden cypresses, in as little as 2 hours of sun. Less than that is really pushing it. And even at 2 hours, make sure that you keep them healthy and not shaded by things directly around them, because they'll thin themselves right out.
And they thin out fast.
And those that have gold coloration, the gold fan, the threadleaf false cypress, they'll lose their color. They'll just be green when you're growing them in a lot of shade. But they can be quite pretty.
And then Irene, speaking of quite pretty, wants to know if you have any good online sources for the Japanese cypress.
Well, we have ordered Japanese cypress from Musser Forests in Pennsylvania, and also from Forest Farm
in
Oregon, and Gosler Farms in Washington? I think Gosler Farm. I think Gosler Farms is in Washington.
Washington, Oregon.
That's generally where we buy, but there are other good sources for them. We are, however, always buying very small. Many of you know, because you've seen our talk about roots, that buying large is not a good idea, especially
at this time. Especially
with slow growing conifers, because they're kept a long time in small pots and end up with severely girdled roots if they're bigger.
And based on what you said a second ago and the picture that's up when you were talking about the wonder of use, there were a few people in the chat, including Gretchen. We know about Gretchen's deer who say, yes, but the deer get them. Do you have any, is there anything that can be done to ameliorate deers on ewes, or would it just be best to pick something else?
It's best to pick something else. We grow plum
If you
yew.
can't exclude them.
Right, we grow plum yew. As long as you're in the warmer zone 5, you can grow plum yew, which is a cephalotaxis. And so far, and it's been going on 8 years now,
It hasn't
they
been
have
touched.
not touched them. And these are in heavy deer yards where they browse everything else all around them. So
And they do well in the shade and hold their green. They're not as dark green as the yew, but they look really good.
And there's probably only 2 varieties. There's a wide spreading one, and there is a more upright one. But so cephalotaxis, cephalo like head, cephalo, cephalotaxis.
And Pat has just dropped into the chat about Pyrrhus japonica. She says she loves them and the deer have left them alone so far.
You know, I have not tried any Pyrrhus japonica where the deer are, because it's one of those that, like the rhododendron, that dries up for us. So I can only grow it in Boston. We have a couple of very nice ones, but not here. So
good to hear.
Point, good
Thank
point.
you.
Janet is asking about the hemlocks that turn dark in the winter. Do they actually turn color again in the spring and summer?
Yes, they do. They green up the same way that arborvitaes green up after they've gone brown. They begin manufacturing chlorophyll again, and they green up. They literally change their color. And it's not a sickness like people, you know, where we get sick and get pale and then they actually are changing their chemical components on purpose.
It protects them.
Yeah, it's antifreeze.
Great. Fantastic. Kathleen is asking, a friend's landscaper pruned up a C. nucatensis, will those branches ever come back? It has been a year and there are little leaflets.
If there's little leaflets, they will come back. And
it will take time.
Right. If it was cut when it was young, there's almost always little sprouts. I cut some severely last year. We had no choice. They'd been let get way too big, and they had triple trunks. I believe we wrote and put pictures of those on the website. If we didn't, I'll put them on this winter. But yeah, you just have to let those grow back out. Same thing with arborvitae. If they've got a little tiny green nub, it's going to grow out.
It could get, you know, with the branches above going out farther, it could get shaded and take even longer to grow out. But the potential is there that they could come back.
So Kathleen, if you wanted to go to the website and do a search for nucatensis, that name. All right. Stacy has a very heavy clay-based soil. She's got a perimeter of blue spruce that are about 20 feet, and she previously had green giant globe arborvitaes. She'd like to add some more trees, but most say they won't grow in clay soil. Any suggestions there?
If the spruce are growing well there, then it is not heavy clay soil. You know your yard, Stacy, so I guess I would have to say, but these plants that we're buying in at our nurseries here are being grown in gumbo clay soil in Tennessee, in North Carolina,
in Georgia.
I mean, sticky clay stuff. As long as there's air in there, you should be able to grow just about anything in Michigan. Any grower will tell you that. So if spruces are growing there, others of the conifers should grow there. Probably the only ones that I'd worry about would be the firs, because so many of the firs and some of the pines, like the jack pines and the native red pine, not the Japanese red pine, are pretty particular about liking a very aerified, sandy kind of soil. But
we had just a quick about the picture. Amy's curious, where is this picture? Is that at Mike and Katie's? Is that out west?
It was on the Pacific coast, off near Santa Cruz.
Yeah, great, excellent. That's what I thought. Northern-ish California. All right. Okay. Teresa is asking, how do American larch tamarack do in the winter? She loves the pine cone that looks like the little wooden rose. Yeah,
they do fine in the winter. There are some. I could probably, if I had my softball arm back, I could probably hit some from here. if there's lots of moisture, they're native there and they do very well. They do, however, look like dead spruce trees in the winter. We are every year asked by someone what happened to the spruces along I-75. They've all lost their needles, and it's because they're not spruces, they're tamaracks.
And they do look like a dead spruce.
Right.
You have to put it in a place of subtlety.
We're going to need to move on so we can get through how to.
Just a very quick follow-up from Therese about she's got a 6 to 7 foot tamarack to plant. Is that too large to plant?
If I looked at the roots, I could tell you for sure. It really depends. They're pretty fast growing, so they
people still
gone.
plant them. That's to plant correctly and have them survive.
Yeah, you may have to do some cutting on the roots or some unwinding. You just have to look and see what's happened.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we're going to move on so that we can give you some help on arranging these things. So that's all for chapter 1 for Winter Interest in Landscape. We're done looking, and thank you for coming to gardenatz.org, and bear with us as we break this into sections for you.